Welcome back, everyone. Oz here, and today I've got some r/BoomersBeingFools for you all. As per usual, I'll be narrating the post, giving you my opinions, and I hope you do the same in the comments below. And without further ado, let's jump right into it. Mr. Skuggs. Sometimes they aren't fools. They're just weird. Boomer story. I had an event to attend today. My husband and kid came along. I'm black, like, no ambiguousness to it. Black. Kiddo is biracial. She looks like the literal white version of me with blonde hair. Currently, her hair is in blonde box braids with purple mixed in. Cue Boomer. I already knew we were about to be in for some because she was staring at my kid hard. She came up and surprised me. "Your hair is so beautiful," she said to my kid. The kid has gotten this since she was a baby, so she's gracious and says thank you. I was pleased, thinking there wasn't going to be an issue. I wouldn't be here if there wasn't, though. I know we aren't supposed to say things like that, but her hair is really beautiful. I was a little lost, but I saw that leathery, liver-spotted hand raise up to touch my kid. Up, 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 up. My yell startled her and my husband. Kid is used to it. We look with our eyes, not our hands. I grabbed my kiddo and rushed her away, pushing her towards my husband. On the drive home, my husband said I sounded like a preschool teacher. Hey, if it works, it works. And it's an apt description, as I was one a very long time ago. So I actually learned this from a John Oliver special because I grew up in Idaho and my skin is susceptible to moonburn. Apparently, it's really common for people just to go up and just touch black hair without permission. Like, why? Like, I've never had the desire to touch someone's hair that I don't know, and I've never been in a position where I've seen someone touch someone's hair who they didn't know. And I always kind of assumed that it was a rare circumstance, but thanks to the curse of the Bader-Meinhof phenomena, I'm noticing it a lot more. I've got to ask, for those of you who are in my audience and a person of color, how often does this kind of shit happen? And for those of you who don't know what the Bader-Meinhof phenomena is, I might be mispronouncing that, but it's spelled with 2 A's in Bader. To put it in simple terms, it's the phenomena for when you first learn of something and you begin noticing it everywhere. In the process of Googling this to make sure that I wasn't simply misspeaking or getting the phenomena wrong, it's also known as the frequency illusion, which can be classified as the same thing of basically, when you first learn of something, your brain no longer sees that particular item as static or just background noise, and you begin to notice it more frequently, which creates the illusion of it being more prevalent after you learned about it. It's kind of a cool little thing. Sorry for the side tangent there, but roping it back to the original topic, how often does this happen where people will come up to you and actively poke around and touch your hair without asking for permission? And even with that added, how often do people ask for permission to touch your hair? The weird Poseidon child. My grandmother tried to set me, a minor, up with an adult man and my uncle. Boomer's story. Hopefully this belongs here. I felt this was a story that needed to be shared. A little while ago, my grandmother, her husband, and my uncle were visiting for the holidays. My grandmother likes when we go out and do stuff, so we went to an escape room one day. The instructor was a man who looked to be about 26 at least, and he kept trying to explain how the escape room worked to us, but my grandmother kept interrupting him to chat about random stuff. At one point, she said, "He's cute." My name, "Isn't he cute?" Which caused me and everyone else to cringe immediately. Not only is it weird to talk about somebody like they're not there, but I was 15 at the time. I'm now 17. And this man was at least 10 years older than me. I'm also Aroace, but she doesn't know that. Even if she did, she'd probably ignore it because she's deeply queerphobic. A few days passed, and I thought that matter had long since been left behind, but as I'm sitting on the couch, I suddenly overhear my grandmother talking to someone and saying she wants to set my name up with the cute instructor from the escape room. My uncle was immediately like, "Mom, what the f***? She's literally a minor, and that's a grown man." But my grandmother acted like that wasn't an issue. Another few days pass, and me and my uncle are in my yard. For my birthday, he had bought me a rock tumbler, and since we both really like rocks and gemstones, we were playing with it outside. We were both talking about whatever, and I mentioned to him that I thought it was really f***ing weird how she wanted to set me up with an adult man. And he got this odd look on his face before lowering his voice. "Don't tell anyone I told you this," he whispered. "But a few months ago, when I had called her to talk about birthday gifts for you, and I mentioned I was getting you a rock tumbler, and she said, And this is where it gets truly insane. This is the conversation he told me happened. Grandmother, you guys have all the same interests. You should just marry each other. Uncle, Mom, what the hell? She's my niece. Grandmother, so? I'm not kidding. That's what he told me she said. Needless to say, we both wanted to vomit. My grandmother has always been super fucking weird, but I don't think this experience will ever leave my memory. Sorry if this story doesn't belong. I wonder if the grandmother got married when she was a teenager, and that's why there's kind of this, oh, it doesn't really matter what age she is, mentality that's kind of being thrust upon her right now, because this is, I don't even know, man. I'm trying to find reasons for this and maybe explanations, but this is just weird and creepy, and there's gotta be some kind of like neuro connection that's been made in her mind that makes her believe this is okay, but I just can't piece it together. Especially with the whole uncle part, that's gotta be really uncomfortable for him. Not even mentioning the cringe that OP's going through that her grandmother keeps trying to set her up with adult men, including family members. Does anyone have a possible explanation for this? Because the grandmother is just weird. And when I say explanation, I'm not looking for a justification, I'm more of looking for, hey, help me understand why she might think this is okay. Nate Nat 04. Boomer man refusing to let me interrupt him from talking to my minor daughter. Boomer story. This happened about a year and a half ago. My daughter, then 17, and I stopped to get gas at a gas station. My daughter offered to pump the gas, so I was waiting in the driver's seat, and the passenger window was down. Cue the boomer, 60 to 65 male coming over to talk to my daughter. He starts off pretty close to her, in her personal space. He's making small talk, complimenting the car and whatnot, and I see my daughter put her hand inside the window and waving to me. She hates confrontation, and she tends to try to not hurt anyone's feelings, so she didn't speak up for herself in this instance. So as I saw her wave, I get out of the car and say, "Come on, sweetie, it's time to go." I shit you not. This boomer had the audacity to say to me, "I'm talking to her. You can get back in the car." I responded with, "The f***? You're talking to my minor child and tell me to leave? Are you some pervert who won't leave a child alone?" He mumbled under his breath, and there was something about not being respectful to him. I just talked over his mumbling with, "Stop making young girls uncomfortable, you creep." And he waddled himself back over to his car. I have never been so angry at a boomer as I was in that moment. My daughter told me she didn't want to be disrespectful, but he wouldn't stop talking to her and was getting too close. Since then, she definitely has found her voice and doesn't take crap anymore. I am literally just appalled by the entitlement of these older men and them feeling entitled to talk to and intimidate young girls. It's just so gross. So assuming, of course, the boomer thought that he was talking to like a young adult in her 20s, I really would still want to know the circumstances in which there was a guy in the car who told her to get in and it's time to go, and he responds with, "I'm talking, you can get back in the car." Like, what's the logic behind that? Like, did he think that if he showed off how confident he was to tell her father, or possibly in his eyes, maybe, her older boyfriend, to get back in the car, that she would be wooed by it and swoon right into his arms? Like, being charitable that he didn't actively target a minor for this conversation, because if he did, there's a whole new level of what the fuck attached to it. I really cannot imagine what was going on in his head to tell someone to get back in the car because he's talking to her. I'm also really confused as to why boomers think they're entitled to any form of respect. I wonder if it's a generational thing where they had to respect their elders, so now that they've aged, they believe they deserve the same level of respect, but are shocked and appalled that they aren't receiving it. Because for him to be yelled at for talking to a minor, then be like, "I just don't get any respect nowadays," it's a really weird line of logic, my dude. Never enough tape. Bully boomer father finally learns. Boomer story. I, 37 male, and my father, 64 male, have always had a strained relationship. He never prioritized fatherhood or his family. He's the fifth of 6 children, and the only male from my grandparents. This is important for context to his personality. He has adult spoiled baby syndrome. This led to him throwing a temper tantrum any time he does not get his way. I use the term temper tantrum now because that's what I see all of his rage and anger as. Now, my father was highly abusive. To my mother, to my stepmother, to me, and least of all, to my younger sister. The best way to describe him is as a bully. Big guy at 6'2" at 250 pounds. But he likes to use his size and anger as intimidation tactics. biting the lip, hunching the shoulders forward, clenching fists, talking through a closed jaw, all highly indicative signals of someone about to be violent. I had my absolute fill of this in my youth and left for the military as soon as I could. Fast forward 15 years later. Boomer father keeps his tired ways of anger and intimidation. An event took place a couple of weeks ago where my father was dog-sitting at my house while I was at school on Saturday. For context, I don't drink, sans very special to me occasions. However, my father drinks daily. For the 10-year anniversary of losing 6 friends in Afghanistan in May of 2013, I purchased myself a very good bottle of bourbon. The bottle sat unopened in my office for over a year, and this past May, I finally cracked open the bottle and poured myself one small shot. I sat with my dog and sipped my drink and celebrated the men I feel so honored to have known. I left school a little early that day to drive back to my house, hoping I could meet my dad and we could go out for dinner or something. When I got home, he's not there. I walk in to see my kitchen out of order and that bottle of bourbon is half gone. Now, I realize it is just alcohol. There's nothing significant about this particular brown liquid. However, it was important to me. The bourbon was well hidden and placed in a high and discreet place, but there were several bottles of wine on the counter, housewarming gifts. When I call my father about it, he belittles his actions, blames me, deflects, and then insults me. When I hold his feet to the fire and call him out on his narcissistic tactics, he flips that old rage switch back on. He showed up to my house, screaming at me, charging at me in my backyard. He was about 6 inches from my face, yelling at me, and I backed away from him 3 times. The 4th time he took a step toward me, that was it. I launched him. I hit that man offensive lineman style, both hands to the chest with every single ounce of strength I could find. He fell back 15 feet and landed on his back. I jumped on top of him, wrapped his arms around his head so he was completely immobilized and completely at my will. I did not hit him or take more advantage of his compromised position. I yelled into his face, "Do you see the power dynamic now?" I got off of him, expecting him to get up and be in a full-fledged physical fight with my father. He got up and screamed at me, called me by my mother's maiden name, to which I replied, "Go beat on women and children." Every vulgarity and nasty thing he said, I replied the same way, "Go beat up on women and children." My sister called me a few days later telling me my father had 2 broken ribs, to which I responded, "Good. Hopefully he learns." I'm not proud of my actions. I never want to have to be violent again. I never wanted this kind of relationship, but everyone has their breaking point. Edit, this is not new behavior for him. He pulled this move on my sister about 3 years ago, and I told him then what would happen. Second edit. For the folks thinking I live with my father, no, not the case. I own my own home. He was dog sitting for the day at my house. I've tried rebuilding an adult relationship over the past couple of years. Until that day, we were on pretty good terms. Wow and wow, these comments and messages are overwhelming. I hate that so many have experienced this kind of relationship with a parent. I know what it did to me and how it shaped me into the person I became. You become the person you needed as a child, which I did. We've been no contact since the event, and I'm perfectly happy with that. The fact that he was willing to use this tactic on his daughter is pretty telling of the kind of character. He thinks that he can go around and just bully people and puff out his chest and people will back down and he can get what he wants. He probably most certainly wasn't expecting to find himself on the ground in a position like that after thinking his macho man routine would get him what he wanted. And keep in mind, this event happened after the father was trying to justify raiding his son's house for alcohol and drinking a bottle of liquor that was dedicated to friends he lost in Afghanistan. The father's rage was in service of justifying those actions. He thought he could get away with bullying his own children, and look what happened. 2 broken ribs. Sagian colors. Boomer Association shockingly dies because they didn't make space for younger people. Boomer story. My neighborhood was built in the early 1970s, and almost everyone who moved in then were boomers. They stayed and were overwhelmingly the majority of homeowners until around 12 to 15 years ago when a slow change of generations started. I was one of the first younger people, 30 at the time. The neighborhood has a voluntary residents association, making events for the neighborhood and doing other stuff to make it a nice place to be. 5 boomers had made up the board of the RA for decades, voted in and stayed in by their boomer neighbors voting for them. I remember when I moved in 15 years ago and took a look at the newsletter. Batank picnics, bus trips to old people's places, bingo events, walks in the middle of the day, the usual. About 10 years ago, the newsletter started to mention in the minutes that there had been suggestions for Halloween events for children, RA paying for the transport to an amusement park, a joint garage flea market, having a midsummer celebration, all events that families with children would like. Every time it was shot down, the board saying that they didn't think it was of interest to the members. That's when I quit my membership. A few years later, the newsletter started to remind people that in order for the RA to make nice events for the neighborhood, residents needed to be members. The mention of this became increasingly sharp. A year or two later, the newsletter now asked for new board members, as a few had died and the rest were getting too old to handle the task. The last 3 to 4 newsletters got increasingly desperate, begging for members and board members. Then, a very salty last newsletter that the RA had now been shut down. The end. I see it in a lot of other associations and societies at the moment. Boomers have been sitting heavily in the seats of power, only ever serving their own desires, and now they want a change of generations. But no one younger has been involved in leadership or even membership for decades. Younger people have found other social avenues. No one is interested. So all these associations, many of them way older than the boomers, now just die slowly as the boomers die. Ironically, I now see new associations and societies spring up, made by younger people around the same topics or interests. If boomers hadn't hoarded their own knowledge and experience, young people didn't have to start from zero. Honestly, the moment that suggestions started coming in about parental activities, the boomers should have changed their tone and approach to how the society was being run. But instead, they wanted to maintain their status quo despite everything changing around them. It's very fitting that the final letters from this association were blaming the people who weren't signing up for memberships. Like, why sign up for an association when every idea or event that you would have an interest in gets shut down because they don't think there's much interest in the general community? Honestly, it's both surprising and not surprising at all that alarm bells weren't ringing when they noticed that memberships and general association with their club started to sharply decline as they declined new events and essentially isolated younger members and focused more on what they wanted to do, rather than making an experience that the newly growing neighborhood would enjoy. Honestly though, I'm actually really shocked that a joint garage flea market didn't get green lights on all panels from the boomers because, like, my grandmother eats that up. So that's kind of a shock on my end. Coyote bong water. Boomer didn't know he had to pay for services rendered. Throws grown man tantrum. Boomer freak out. I work at a vet clinic in an insufferably rich neighborhood. Most people are perfectly normal and pleasant. Very sick or dying pets mean that emotions sometimes run high. It's not uncommon for people to get somewhat rude or shitty. Usually, it's fine. But once a month or so, I have to put up with an S-tier fat old boomer. Not someone grieving or under high stress, just pathetic old bullies. Today we had a client send her dad to get an injection for her cat. This takes barely 5 minutes. When they handed Boomer Dad the cat carrier afterward, he just turned around and bolted. Didn't pay. Clinic manager is sitting next to me at the front desk at the time. She sees this and goes out to flag him down before he gets into his car. I don't know what she said, but it must have hit a nerve, or he really just sucked. Boomer comes back in huffing and puffing. Well, nobody told me I had to do that. I didn't know. Where do you people get off talking like that? Continued to bitch and moan, talking over me the entire time as I got him checked out. I didn't engage with his whining, just told him the total and where to tap his card, etc. Not reacting seemed to set Boomer off even more. Demanded to know my name. I said no, handed him his receipt, which he crushed like a toddler, and then blankly stared him down, repeating, "Have a good one," over and over until he finally opined. "The attitude here is terrible. I won't be coming back here." He said 1 or 2 more things, but they were completely unintelligible. Still beat red in the face, stomping off. I f***ing revile these people. It's hard to let it become a generalized hatred toward anyone who looks over 55. I know that for men like him, there's no greater punishment than being themselves, but I still hope he— Edit, I don't like to wish people ill, so I'm recanting the rest of what I said since I'm no longer seething. Oh, and the cow was cute. Yeah, this guy knew exactly what he was doing. Unless somehow in his entire life he never either had to foot the bill or had ever been inside of some kind of clinic, veterinary or not, I do not see how he just saw that it was appropriate to walk out with the cat carrier thinking there was no bill or payment structure to be in place. This also annoys me because veterinarians deal with one of the hardest jobs that you can possibly have when it comes to this kind of space because, well, I mean, hell, it shows in the fact that their suicide rates are 5 times higher than that of the general population. They have to deal with pets coming in and sometimes they don't come out. And just with how humans work as a species, if your pet doesn't come out, you're going to blame someone, even if it's not inherently their fault. And I'm sure they already carry that guilt on their own and don't need the reminder of it from upset pet parents. On a second note, this is tangentially related, but when you guys have your pets, do you guys sometimes forget that they're an animal? That might sound crazy, but like when I'm around like an animal for long enough that I'm familiar with and it's part of like the family structure, I stop seeing them as an animal and it's just like, oh, this dork lives here. Like I know that they're a dog or a cat, but fundamentally my brain no longer associates them as being an animal. I don't know if that makes sense at all, but does anyone else experience anything somewhat like that? Genuine question, because it's something that happens in my head and I've wondered if it happens to anyone else. Snark_X. Boomer doesn't want me using her air at the gas station. Boomer freak out. This morning I went to the gas station to put air in a tire and there's a boomer lady already using the air. She pulls away and I pull up and she stops and gets out and tells me, "You have to wait for the machine to stop and pay for your own air. I paid for that and it's mine." I laughed and said, "Wait, you paid for air? It's free at service stations in California. You walk inside, tell them to turn on the air, press the button on the side of the machine twice and it comes on." Then I pointed at the little sign that had the California service station law info on the side of the compressor. She goes into full boomer rage, threatening me, telling me to respect my elders, and that she was going to call the police since I was so comfortable stealing, and shouting that I better wait, and even if it is true, walk over there myself, otherwise I gotta pay like she did. The cashier guy came out and asked what was happening because he heard yelling. I asked him politely to turn on the air for me when the machine turns off. He was like, "Okay, no problem." The lady screeched like a feral hyena, got back in her vehicle and peeled out of the parking lot. All over a couple bucks and quarters she didn't have to spend in the first place. Classic. Honestly, I'm wondering if laws like that exist elsewhere, because if they are, then in Colorado or Idaho or, who knows, that's actually a really good law to have in place because it encourages people to keep their tires at actual proper pressure. Not only does it potentially save lives, but it keeps roads safer by providing free air for your tires. And even if that law wasn't in place, and if let's say I had filled up like my tires and I had put the quarters in the machine or my card or whatever, and then I went off and drove away and someone pulled up, the machine was still running, and they started using the air, I wouldn't give it. The air would have been wasted otherwise. May as well have someone else use it because I feel bad when I leave and the machine is still running because it just feels like noise pollution. So if someone else gets some use out of it and they don't have to spend as much money because they're working on it, who cares? That air is just wasted anyways. Ah yes, I'll show you by filling all of my tires up to 60 PSI. Yeah, that'll show you. No one gets to use the free air except me. Although, honestly, because air is pretty cheap, it's like, I think 5 quarters for like 5 minutes of compressed air. I'll probably still just put the quarters in the machine because I don't want to have to interact with the cashier. No, actually, I don't even have to do that because I have an air compressor at home. What? I own an air compressor. I keep forgetting that. Maybe that'll come in handy when I can actually afford to have a car in the future. That'd be pretty cool, not gonna lie. Content warning for death. The fractal potato. Local boomer punches 39-year-old man over his tattoos. Man dies. Boomer sentenced today to just 7 years in prison. Boomer freakout. I can't even with this one. This 65-year-old asshole was at a bar and saw this man, Josh, on a date night with his wife. Man happens to have tatted sleeves that he designed himself. Fucking Boomer feels the need to go up to this man and tell him that he's going to hell and God will not save you over his tattoos. He then follows the man outside, first throws a stool at Josh and then throws a punch that made Josh fall backwards, where he hit his head on the cement. He had skull fractures and brain bleeds and died 26 days later. He was a husband, father, son, brother, and by all accounts was a pretty terrific human being. These lead-addled, can't control themselves boomers took an innocent life over absolutely nothing. 7 years is a joke. He needs to serve hard time until he dies. And below they actually linked the article to this exact situation that happened. Fox 6 reported, Wisconsin man punched over tattoos, dies. Kevin Semmer sentenced. To break things down, he had the audacity to argue that it was in self-defense, despite the bar's security cameras showing that he confronted them with a stool in hand and led to the death of Josh. The irony is that a man that was so delved in his own convictions and dealing with the fact that anyone with tattoos would most certainly go to hell, committed one of the biggest sins of all and is most certainly on the express train to hell. Now, of course, not all boomers are violent pieces of shit. Any person from any generation is capable of this kind of act of brutality. I think the reason why we're looking at this one specifically is because lead poisoning is permanent. It can never be reversed. Its symptoms tend to flare up more as you age, and degenerative symptoms tend to be more expressed because of the damage that lead has done. I believe it's been shown that lead poisoning can lead to heightened anger, paranoia, and a general cognitive decline. I would like to hope that these can be a contributing factor to why this man acted in such a violent and horrendous way, because I honestly struggle to comprehend or understand why you would get so violent with someone with tattoos. A lot of this, of course, is just me looking at someone else's research and applying it to a situation like this and hoping to make some sense of it, because damn, these actions barely make any sense. Have you been waiting to try gamer subs, but the shipping cost is just a bit too high because you're not in America? Well, I got good news for you. For a limited time, for like a week, shipping is free if you use code EYES. The 10% discount has been replaced with free shipping. So if the usual spiel of gamer subs caught your attention, but the shipping costs were a bit high, now's your chance. So strap in and strap on and use code EYES at checkout for some free shipping between the days and... did I really just say that? It's September 6th to September 13th. Hope y'all enjoy free shipping. Code EYES.